What's up, YouTube? This morning I'll be talking about several things, mostly about riding long distances and, of course, planning for it. All the things that you need to consider when you're going on a long trip. We're going to talk about what you should be doing, preparing for it, and of course all the other things that you need to take into account when you're traveling long distances. Now, most of us have traveled across the border, and that's basically what we want to do. I mean, today we'll be discussing about what we would do as cruiser riders, right? And of course all the adventure bikes as well. I'm not saying that the sports riders don't go long distances. They do, especially in Singapore, in order for them to be able to go to the track. And the closest one to Singapore is actually KL, which is a fair distance. We're talking about almost 600 kilometers, and they too would have to travel long distances to go to. But in general, the cruisers market and of course the adventure tour guys and the sports tour guys are the ones that would be considering going long distances, because the purpose of us getting this particular type of bike is basically to go on long distances. The purpose of getting a cruiser and an adventure bike and so forth and a sports tourer is basically to travel long distances, to be able to see the sights, to be able to explore in comfort. Now, let's talk about the things that you need to consider, right? So the first thing is that before going on a long trip, there are three basic things that you need to remember. I'm sure this has been said over and over again by a lot of people. Now, so the first thing that you need to consider is get enough sleep. I know the excitement of the night before, wanting to go on this trip, actually, it deprives you of that sleep in a sense, because you keep thinking about, oh, it's happening tomorrow, I'm so excited and so forth. But the average adult should have between 7 to 8 hours of sleep, and this is what's recommended anyway. So try to get some sleep, do what you need to do. If you want to factor in your excitement, sleep really early. Because in a long trip, you have to consider that, you need to be sharp, you need to be tuned in to the traffic, tuned in to everything. And the last thing you need to do is tune out to the situation. Second thing, hydrate. Drink lots of water. The night before, drink lots of water before you go to bed. When you get up in the morning, drink some more water. Before you actually embark on your journey, drink some more water. And at every stop point, drink water. That's it. Water, water, water. I mean, you can also get those isotonic drinks, the sports drinks and so forth. That will help give you some energy as well. But I think water is still the best. One of the things to avoid while traveling is, when you talk about hydration, is don't drink coffee or tea, because that's going to make you more hydrated. That's just going to make it worse. If you have to drink coffee because you think you need to wake up, you need to get that boost of caffeine, then do so, but make sure that you drink water after, right? I know that there are a couple of riders that actually fit on a hydration pack. I've never done it before. I really want to try, because to me the hardest part is figuring out how to put that little tube close enough within a full face helmet for you to be able to reach it and grab your water. Otherwise, if it's just flinging around and you can't really get to it, then it's completely useless, right? There are a lot of, if you go to any sports shop, you should be able to get a 1 or 2 liter. I think the minimum is 2 liters hydration pack. Krieger actually sells it as well. I think it's a 2 liter hydration pack. So I think maybe that's a good thing to do. If you're the sort that consumes a lot of water. And the last point is always plan for your trips, right? It's good to be able to know what you're personally capable of. Let's not talk about the machine, okay? We all know the specs when we bought it. We know how much foot torque it's capable of, what is the fuel consumption, which we'll get to in a bit, and so forth. But you need to know about yourself, right? How much you can take. So rest stops is important, right? When you plan as many rest stops as possible. Because you don't, if it's the first time that you've been on a long trip, you really don't know exactly how you would feel after the first stop, right? And if you're really, really tired for whatever reason, I think it's good that you actually have a rest stop, right? Normally you plan between 150 to 200 kilometers to the next stop. If after riding for a while and you realize that, okay, it's a bit too much, then I think you should inform the team leader or inform the group, that you've reached your limit and maybe it's a little bit too much. Remember, if you're tired and you want to stop, you inform the group, that you've reached your personal limit, and you would like to have a break, right? Because you'll never know your limits. And of course, if as a group you all have this, which a communicator, right? In this case, this is a camera as well, but a communicator like this, it will mean that you'll be able to just tell them that you're tired, right? Now, the next thing that we need to talk about is planning, right? Which actually is the last thing on that particular list. But it's also important to plan, to know your rest stops, where's the alternate rest stop, where the places you're going to go off and so forth, especially if you don't have a communicator. You don't want, in the middle of the trip, be surprised that, you get lost, or worse still, you end up in the wrong place. They're all going off to a particular rest stop and you're heading straight forward. Now that's going to be a problem later on, right? So planning on the trip is really important. Rest stops, meal breaks, and most importantly, the planning also is to determine the distances, to talk about your fuel capacity, right? I mean, for the various models that we have, we got different tank capacities, and we have to take into account the performance of the various bikes that are on the particular trip, right? So since primarily I'm riding a Harley, I'll talk about Harleys and flash up a little fuel consumption chart and the mileage that you get out of it, or should I say the kilometers you get out of it. And for those who are riding sports bikes and others, I'll put up a link below. There is actually a site I can't remember exactly the name of it at the moment, but it actually has all the tables for all the makes of bikes in terms of fuel consumption and so forth, so that you'll be able to then use that information planning your trips. Right? So again, I'll flash up that information for you in terms of the website, and I'll also put it down in the description below. But primarily, I'm going to flash the consumption chart for all the Harley Davidson's models, from Sportsters all the way to Touring. So that you'll know exactly how far you need to go for the guy with the smallest tank, right? So obviously the smallest tank would be the Sportster, especially if it's a 48. 48 is about 7.9 liters. Roughly you'll get about 158 kilometers to a liter.
The biggest assumption I'm making here is that in general, highway riding, they would roughly do about an average of about 20 kilometers to a liter. Some will do less, some will do more. This is depending on the cruising speed that you're on. Right? In most bikes, the sweet spot is always around 120 and 130. If you do beyond that, and that's when you start to consume more fuel. So let's again assume that everyone does an average of about 20 kilometers to a liter. So if you look at the Sportster 48, it's a 7.9 liter tank. The total range on a full tank is 158 kilometers. The Sportster Iron A3 is a 12.5 liter tank, and that would take you to about 250 kilometers. Dyna's is 17.5, 350. Softail is a little bit more. I think it's about 18 liters, so it takes you to about 380. And the touring bikes are 20 liters and above, so they could take you to about 454 kilometers. So when you take this and keep this in mind, and when you are planning a trip and you have a wide range of bikes with you, always take into account the smallest denominator. So if you've got a 48 with you, take into account your rest stops, plan your trips, make sure that the Sportster 48 doesn't run out of petrol, right? So that means you probably have to do, and when you look at the, there's actually a plus site that you can go to that shows you the distances between each rest stop. They average between 60 to 70 kilometers, right? So every stop is 70 kilometers. You are reaching your limit if you go from Gelang Patah to Pago, right? Which is what I'm talking about in terms of an example, right? Starting point is always Gelang Patah, ending up in Pago. The 48s and the 72s will not be able to make it unless you're willing to do the speed limit on the plus highway at 110. Then you probably just might. But I think we should never take the risk of that. So when you're traveling with a group of bikes, and the smallest denominator happens to be the 48 or 72, the peanut tank, then the next rest stop's got to be about 70, 80 kilometers away. It means you stop more, but quick stop, Pago, a longer rest, right? And they have to top up all the time. The Dynas, the Softails, and touring bikes can actually run all the way to 200 kilometers before a stop, but the Sportster Iron, maximum is 250, so again, you're taking a little bit of a risk. Pago is about the best, that's about 148 at a later stage. I'll show you the little, all the various calculations from whether it's Google Maps or it's TomTom Rider or Garmin Rider, Garmin GPS, or even your iOS or Google Maps on your phone will show you roughly what is the distances like.
But primarily, I'm going to flash the consumption chart for all the Harley Davidson's models, from Sportsters all the way to Touring. so that you'll know exactly how far you need to go for the guy with the smallest tank, right? So obviously the smallest tank would be the Sportster, especially if it's a 48. 48 is about 7.9 liters. Roughly you get about 158 kilometers to a liter. So let's talk about the tools for planning. In the old days, it was about map reading, getting a map that was to scale. You know, and then once it's in scale, you pull out a little. Once the scale, you pull out a ruler, right? And you measure the distances to be able to know from point A to point B. But this is 2018, and the internet is full of ways in which you can get that information. And of course, being 2018, you would also get information from your GPS, right? So whether you use your phone, whether you use a proper GPS, right? Either a Garmin or a TomTom. I'm using a TomTom 400 and a Rider at the moment. And of course, from the phone, you have your Android or Google Maps or Waze, and of course the iOS map as well, right? So I'm going to show you in a bit the differences and maybe how accurate the mileage is, because when you plot the distance, and here today I'm going to use our example here in Singapore, is that normally we have a meeting point at Gelang Patah Rest and Relax station or area as a first meeting point. This is in Johor. And then from there, make our way to Pago, which is our first stop, which is normally where we would normally stop, which is roughly about 160, almost 170. Now, if you use these apps, which I'll show you in a minute, you realize that it varies a little bit. iOS Maps and Google Maps put it at 148, and my TomTom puts it at about 150 odd, right? So you say, well, 10 kilometers, you know, but sometimes 10 kilometers makes a difference. But in the old days, what we used to do is at the first fuel stop, after we filled up the full tank, I'll use the trip meter to determine how much we've traveled, and if you know and calculated before what the fuel consumption is, then you'll know how much you have left, because that's notoriously what you used to do with a Sportster, right? Because all the Sportsters don't have a fuel gauge. I remember riding my A3R in 48. That's how I determine how much fuel I have left based upon the kilometers I've traveled over the week. So I think it's a good practice anyway, and I think if you're diligent enough, I think you should actually record the kilometers, especially if it's your first trip, to know, right, for each point on that particular trip, for each rest stop, how much you've traveled, and you probably know how much you have consumed in terms of petrol, right? And whether you really need to top up petrol. I think it's also good to use these route planning software if you have. If not, Google Maps is just as good, to be able to gauge where is the best stop or between your journey, or during your journey, should I say, so that you can determine where's the best place to rest, where's the best place to eat, right? And if you think that it's within the fuel capacities of the various bikes, then you can even plan a little detour for food, right, and sites, because that's what it's all about. I mean, I remember going up to our Phuket Bike Week trip last year. We actually stopped in several places. One for breakfast in Kulai, then after which Ipoh for lunch, and I think just before Gurun's, which was the last petrol stop before the border, we actually stopped somewhere to actually have a tea break, which makes it fun, right? You get to go to different places along the way. It's not just traveling along the highway, but it's also about the whole traveling experience, right? So you need to know exactly where you're going to, and then plan for your different breaks. And I think the final and most important thing is this: before your trip, you've already taken care of yourself. You got to take care of your good buddy, the bike, right? If you're going on a long journey, and I think to me a long journey round trip is 1,000 kilometers, send it for servicing. It doesn't matter if you did it the month before. Just send it for a basic servicing. It's okay. Have Harley Davidson check for you all the various parts, right? Whether things need to be tightened up. You really think you need to change certain things like your brakes. You need to change oil. Check everything that needs to be checked. I think I will also put in a YouTube link to this gentleman who I subscribe to, who works for Harley Davidson in the United States. Now he's also a mechanic, right? And he actually has the 5 things that you need to look out for in the various models in Harley Davidson, things that you need to check and tighten up and so forth. And I think it's really, really very good. And I think if you take that advice, I think it will make your trip good, comfortable, and of course, most importantly, just a peace of mind, just to know that everything is working well. So I hope that this has been informational for you. Please do let me know. Do click on the subscribe button below and leave me your comments, and I'll definitely get back to you. All right, so you all have a good day.